So the first question, what's your full name? Full name.
Matthew McGowan.
That's your full name. You don't have a middle name.
No middle name.
Okay. And who were you named after?
My great uncle,
Your great uncle. What's his full name?
Matthew McGowan.
So you weren't like a Matthew McGowan II or anything?
I don't know, but that's what I was named after.
Okay. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Pitt County on September the 29th, 1925.
And when and where were you baptized?
I was baptized in First Presbyterian Church. Now, I can't tell you exactly when, but I must have been about 12 years of age.
Now, were you was that the one downtown Greenville?
Downtown Greenville.
Okay. I don't
Dr.
know.
Robert Boyd was a pastor, and he loved us, was very evangelistic. He took us through a confirmation class.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the only rural person in the class. The rest of them were all city slickers.
What was your first memory of the house you grew up in?
What was now?
What was the first memory of the house you grew up in? What do you remember? First thing you remember about it?
Gosh, it's hard to. I don't know. One of the bad memories I have was I was out on the porch,
Having pictures made.
front porch,
Yeah.
and we had a little lettuce, little
Great to see you this morning.
Dutch girls holding hands on the railing.
I'll need this
Mhm.
with it.
And I was looking at an apple tree. It was raining. There was one apple on a tree, and I wanted to get it. And I was leaning over, and my feet slipped, and I fell in a puddle of water, and had a part of a brick. And my leg hit the brick and broke it.
How old were you?
I don't know. I must have been 5 or 6 years old,
Oh, wow.
maybe younger.
What's your first memory of Mama Mac?
Sit there. Uh-huh.
It was always a good memory of her.
You want to put my shoes on?
I,
Would you like to put my shoes on?
I can remember enjoying helping her cook. She was patient and would allow me to help her cook. And I enjoyed working with her and preparing breakfast or any meal. She was so kind to show me what I could do or should do. I would help her cook breakfast and cook many meals.
What was your first memory of Daddy Mac?
Of course, I don't know, the first memory. The first memory, I guess, one of the first memories, I was a little boy. We were all in his automobile, and we went down to below Chicago, Shelmadine. he was going at night to pay his dues for his Redmond. It was I guess, a club.
What's a red man? Is a red man's is a club?
Yeah, it was, well, it was a lodge.
Okay.
And if you kept your dues paid up, it had life insurance.
Oh.
So he was going to pay his dues, and we all went, and we stopped by a little store and bought my first, he bought a loaf of bread. And we all ate it, and it was a real treat. I had never had loaf bread.
Store-bought bread.
So store-bought bread, and it was sliced already.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept giving us a slice of loaf bread.
Oh.
And I think we ate the whole loaf. There must have been, I guess, 3 children then, I guess.
Yeah.
But we ate it. It was wonderful.
All right. Tell me one memory of Nana Lou.
My first memory?
Or just a memory of her. Something that you would think describes her personality.
Oh, she was one of the sweetest, kindest persons I've ever known. Very gentle, loving, kind, and I remember the doctor when she got sick. The doctor said it would help me get well if she could blow off, have some expression of anger, of resentment with
Right.
her husband, Roger.
Right.
He said she was keeping everything in. Well, I never thought she had anything bad inside of her.
Right.
She was very kind and loving, and I sort of felt like that she was the best one of us.
You did good. All right. And then Jesse. Maybe one memory of Jesse sort of describes his personality.
Well, of course, both of us, we slept together, shared the same bed. And we were studied together by a kerosene lamp. Had a mantle lamp. And that had a mantle in it, and it was real bright.
Uh-huh.
And we dreamed together, fantasized having a freight truck and go owning it and working together. One sleeping, one
Driving.
driving. And we bought a radio before the house was wired for electricity. So when the house was wired, we had the radio ready to go. And we would, in bed, tune in to New Orleans, WWL New Orleans, and listen to the band play in the beautiful Roosevelt Hotel on Canal Street in New Orleans. It was Cliff's Channel station. You could hear it in Canada. And never dreaming that I would one day be a pastor and have a church. just a few blocks from the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans. But we were a lot alike. We did things together. We would date together. Same size. We could walk around and wear each other's clothes. So he must have gone in the summer in 1943 because he finished his boot camp and was stationed at Camp Rucker, Alabama, between Dothan and Ozark. And I knew that I was going into the service in December. So in November, William Ross, my neighbor, and I decided to hitchhike from Pitt County to Alabama to visit Jesse.
How long you taking?
It took at least 2 days. Because we rode a freight train part of the way. Anything we could get going towards Alabama, we would ride. That was the first time I'd been out of the state, was to hitchhike to see Jesse. And we arrived at Camp Rucker, and immediately I was wearing one of his suits, because we're the same size. And he took us into his barracks. You know, must have had I guess we were in the gas quarters, because he was not roaming in a barracks. And he said, "Get out of my suit. I want to wear it." So I got out of his suit, and he put his suit back on. And we wanted to see me in a uniform. So I put on his army uniform. And he said, "I want to live to see you in military uniform." So I was afraid that if I got caught, I would be shot at sunup. But that's really, I was afraid.
Yeah.
So I put on his uniform, and he put on his clothes, civilian clothes. And we took a picture, he did, of a box camera.
Yeah.
Took a picture of me in his uniform. I don't know where he is.
Right.
But that's the only time, first time I wore an Army uniform. Because I went in the Marine Corps. But that's, Jesse and I loved each other. We were very close. We graduated from high school together. He repeated the fifth grade, and I caught him in fifth grade. We went to Hollywood School, the first 4 grades in those days. When you finished the 4th grade, the next year you went to the big school in Chicago. And so he and I then were in the same grade all the way through, and we graduated together in 1943. And he would write me every day the chaplain wrote Mom after he died, and said, your son was famous for doing three things every day. He was seen reading his Bible every day, and he would write to his mother every day. He would write to his brother every day. And I wish I had kept the letter he wrote to me last. He told me how cold it was and how deep the snow was. And he says, it is real rough fighting. And if, you put an if in, if I survive tonight, I will write you tomorrow. And he was killed that night. And that was, must have been one of the last things he did, was wrote me a little letter.
Mm.
And because he didn't make it. He was killed.
And how did you find out about it?
I got a wire. You know, when he died, I was in the Marine Corps, and I was acting sergeant major. I was only a corporal in the Marine Corps. But I had been working. My first job was to work for a very salty sergeant major. He must have spent more than 30 years in the Marine Corps. And I was always interested in details. So I got me a filing cabinet right beside my desk, and my desk was beside his. And every publication that came across my desk, I made a copy of it. And I had my own filing drawer. So when he had to go home on an emergency leave, they moved me to his desk as a corporal. And the colonel, we worked for a lieutenant colonel, he would call me and ask me for a certain publication. And I didn't have to go to the library. I pulled the drawer out, and I pulled it out, and I had it on his desk in 30 seconds. And that impressed him. So he never moved me from that front desk. And one day, it called a dispatch, but it was a telegram. Said that he was killed. First of all, said that he was missing in action. Well, I had hundreds of such reports every day, because I was the sergeant major for G1. G1 housed all the personnel matters. In that case, in the position. So all the killed in action, missing, wounded, I received it. So when it came to my desk, after I read it, at first it did not seem real. Then it dawned on me that Jesse was missing in action. And I went to the head, that's the toilet. I went to the head and got in a stall, and I kept reading it over and over again. And I said, this can't be true. This has got to be a mistake. And I don't recall crying, but I was shocked, in a state of shock, that out of the hundreds and thousands reports that I've read. Now, this one says Jesse E. McGowan is missing in action. And it really took a day or so for it to dawn on me that Jesse was missing in action. And I think it took, I don't know how long, 2 or 3 weeks before he was declared killed in action. At least it took 2 or 3 weeks for the dispatch, that's what we call it, a telegram to reach me that he was actually killed in action. And I had to go, then I really was grief stricken because I felt at that time I had made a great discovery. I had stuttered all my life, had a speech impediment. But somebody invited me to the big garden, and I drank my first beer. And the second beer, I was beginning to feel it. And the third beer, I could speak without stuttering. And I said, hallelujah, I made a great discovery. So every day the bus would come in from Pearl Harbor, where I was stationed, I would go to the beer garden because it felt so good that I didn't stammer and stutter and after I got about 3 beers. So I was on the way to becoming addicted to alcohol. Jesse was a good man. I don't remember that he was very sharp academically. He had a hard time. He tried hard. But that's why he repeated that grade. I don't know. Because we always dreamed of owning a motor line and swapping out and sharing the truck. Maybe building a truck line. And I don't know how, if he had lived, how that would have affected me. Only God knows that. But I doubt if Jesse would have gone to college. Might have gone to a technical school, because he's more a tech guy. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, I felt like God made a mistake. He took the wrong one. And frankly, I have been a workaholic all of my life. And I felt like maybe I was trying to do my work and Jesse's work because he didn't make it. I don't know. That's a flaw. Rather than enjoying life, I had to work. As if the Lord was more pleased with me, I guess, if I kept working. Anyway.
Now, when you got out of the the Marines, what did you think you were going to do for the next couple of years? Did you have a calling, or what did you want to do?
I felt called into the ministry in the Marine Corps. I wrote Dr. Boyd, and he was our minister. And immediately when I got really converted, I got in with a group of servicemen, and we were influenced by the navigators. And we memorized scripture. At one time, I guess I could recite from memory hundreds of Bible verses. And every night, I think at least 6 out of 7 nights, I was in a Bible study on some military installation on Oahu. It might have been a Marine, or Navy, or Air Force. And but I was so religious, became so religious that the major, who was next to the lieutenant colonel, he said to me one night, we were working way almost all night during a campaign, Iwo Jima. He said, "You're so religious. Have you seen that church between in Honolulu? Said Jesus is coming soon?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'm gonna put that damn sign on top of your desk." I said, "Amen. He coming soon." And he would tell me that his brother was a priest. And that's wonderful. But I said, he can't get enough faith to save your soul. I said, Major, unless you repent of your sins, you're going to hell. And he said, I could court-martial you for that. And I said, well, I would tell the truth. But I was unbalanced. And I realized that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got really converted, I was sort of sold out to Jesus. And I wrote to Dr. Boyd and I told him what. In fact, Dr. Boyd felt that, he said that he had promised not to leave the ministry until he found his replacement. And as a little boy, 12 years of age, he would bring me to his house to cut his grass on the 9th Street. And he would bring me into his library and say, I promised the Lord I would not leave the ministry until I found my replacement. And I believe you to take my place.
Amen.
And he said, my son, I wanted him to be a preacher, but he's an architect in Philadelphia. So I felt like I had to owe it to Dr. Boyd to write to him, tell him I felt called. And he was afraid I was going to some fundamentalist group. So he said, Davidson College is where you gotta go, and Union Seminary. And about every letter he'd write to me, he said, Davidson College and Union Seminary. That's where you gotta go. So I wrote to Davidson and asked him what was the requirements to enter Davidson. And they were very nice. And I liked trigonometry. So I went to night school and took geometry and trigonometry and sent the transcript to Davidson. So they admitted me to Davidson while I was in the Pacific. So when I got out of the service, one of the first places I went was to Mavis's home. And she took me to Blunt Harvey to buy my first suit.
Yeah.
And she was more than a sister, you know. So I would hang out at her house. And so I knew I was going to Davis. So when I got out of the Marine Corps in May 11, 1946, and I entered Davidson in June for summer school. So I went, took 4 years at Davidson and 3 years by going to summer school. But, you know, here again, I hit Davidson College, and my first job was to study. But I felt like I had to save the world. So I worked for the YMCA, I volunteered for the YMCA, Davidson, and I taught Sunday school in little churches. And I started preaching. I think my first summer school in little Presbyterian churches around Kannapolis and Concord, North Carolina. Then I took a church in the Mill Village, Ken Smart and I. So
Were you the associate pastor or the pastor?
we were student pastors, both of us.
Okay.
We had to go to chapel on Sunday night at Davidson Den. So they gave us permission to alternate on Sunday night. So every other Sunday night I had to be in chapel in my assigned seat. And they had monitors to monitor to make sure you were in your seat. So I regret that I didn't study harder at Davidson. I would not have been Phi Beta Kappa, but I would have been a better student if I had really applied myself. And that was a bad mistake.
Okay. You know, we come down here to the beach every year. And this is part of the reason we're doing this. Do you remember the first time you saw the beach? What you thought of it?
Well,
How old were you?
I don't remember. I think the first time we came to the beach, we stayed at Jonah's place, I think, on the Sound on that side. We couldn't afford to stay over here. We were using the McGowan Trust funds, I think. Daddy Mac didn't have the funds to pay for a beach house. But it was a long time ago. Going out to join the 2nd Marine Division to fire a machine gun that I had never had in my hands. Because at Camp Lejeune, I was short, so I was on the first rank. The major came out in formation and asked if anybody had taken typing in high school. Well, I didn't volunteer. And because there was a man named Williams from Greenville, he was in the Marine Corps, and he advised me not to volunteer for anything. So I stood like a dummy, and I'm the shortest one on the front rank. So the major looked at me and said, "Son, did you take typing in high school?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you volunteer?" I said, "I would advise, sir, not to volunteer for anything."
Great start.
He said, "Get out of the ranks and go into the company office." So I was assigned a clerk typist office, and I handled all the specialty cars, IBM cars. And I saw that I was a machine gunner. So on the morning we were to ship out, the whole battalion was loaded on a cattle wagon, state flat-bodied trailer trucks. And my sea bag had already gone down to the dock. And part of the convoy had already left. There might have been 2 or 3 trucks left. And it was before daylight, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And a PA system sounded off, and they called my name. And they said, "Disembark and report to the headquarters."
All right, we'll start out with something easy, all right? What is your full name,
Irene McGowan Brock.
and were you named after somebody?
No, it was not.
Where did Irene come from?
It's not a family name. I have no idea.
You think
I
it's
think a lot of children my age maybe were named that, at the time.
Okay. And where were you baptized?
At Hollywood Presbyterian Church.
When was that?
I don't remember. I must have been around 9 or 10 years old. Yeah.
Okay. What was your first memory of the house?
The front porch with the swings and of the house. Yeah, it was fun. The children enjoy sitting on the front porch and swinging and climbing on the rails around the front porch.
What was your first memory of Mama Mac?
Mostly riding in the car with all the children, crowded in together and fussing because someone else was touching us. Oh.
Was there a time when you had just had a little alone time with Mama Mac? With that many kids?
Not too much. I was kind of in the middle, and I was don't remember spending a lot of time when I was really small. The most of my memories is when we were older and washing dishes or working in the fields.
What was your first memory of Daddy Mac?
I remember one time that I got up real early and ran away to the next door neighbor's house. It was before breakfast. I was still in my nightgown.
Why were you running away?
And they brought me home. I went up to the next door neighbor's, Mr. Tom Edwards, and wanted to know if he had any cheese. And he gave me some cheese because I was hungry. It was breakfast time. And he brought me home, and Daddy met me, but Daddy didn't fuss or anything, and he just brought me in. And
How old were you?
I was still small. I must have been not over 4 years old.
What was your favorite chore to do on the farm?
My favorite toy?
Chore.
Choice.
Chore. Like a job.
My favorite, I guess, was helping washing dishes. was a chores. That's mostly what we did because, or cleaning the house is the only thing Mama Mac let us do because she wouldn't let us cook. She was afraid we would ruin the food, you know. And we had a big family. We couldn't afford to mess up the meal.
Right.
So my mama always did the cooking, and the girls, washed the dishes and did the house cleaning, yeah.
What was your least favorite job?
If you could you try
Least
to
favorite job?
keep an eye line with me, because when you turn towards him, the light
Okay.
gets in your
All
glasses.
I'll stand right over here.
My least favorite job was, I don't remember. Washing windows probably. I've always not liked washing windows. Yeah.
All right. Tell me one memory of Nana Lou that you would describe her personality.
She always was a very sweet person, always wanted to please. And well, I don't remember. I remember mostly just our teenage years more than I do my small years with her. And Lucille and myself and Nana Lou were all teenagers, and I remember just mostly our dating together and enjoyed the teenage years more than I do the small growing up years.
How much difference in age were y'all?
About 2.5 years.
Okay. Now, one memory of Jesse that would describe his personality. Like, oh, he did that. That is so Jesse.
He was a quiet person too, I think, mostly. He and Matt just palled around mostly. He was an older brother, and you always look up to your older brothers, I think. And he did a lot of, he was like a typical teenager. He did a lot of teasing, and I know he and Lucille would get into it quite often. More so than me.
I'm glad you did that. I gotta
Right.
got something to ask her. All right, and then what? Name me one thing Mama Mac gave you that you would say one gift that Mama Mac gave you.
At Christmas, I definitely remember one year I got a doll, a small doll, and she had fixed it up so pretty. It was in a shoebox, bottom of a shoebox, and she had lined it all, with the padding underneath, and the little doll wasn't much bigger than, it would fit into the shoebox, and it had a little blanket, and that was my big memory of a toy at Christmas,
How old were you?
I must not been over 10, maybe not even 10.
Now, y'all were a close family. Name me one thing Daddy Mac did that you said, man, that was so Daddy Mac.
One thing that Daddy Mac did what?
That would you say was part of his personality?
Well, part of his personality is that he wanted us to be, he didn't want us to shame the community, the family. He wanted us to be perfect and not do anything that would get the neighbors talking, He didn't want to create gossip. He wanted us to behave ourselves, and that was the main thing, I think, that he...
Now, where did you attend school?
I went to Hollywood School till I was, for my first 2 years, and then I went to Chicago School for my elementary and high school years.
And how did you get back and forth to school?
What?
How did you get back and forth to school?
We had to walk out to the main road, I think, to get the school bus. The school bus didn't come up that lane, and it was so nice when the children, everybody in our family, I think, drove the school bus so we could park the school bus at our house, and then so we could drive the school bus when we got to be 16 years old. and I made $18 a month driving the school bus.
Oh, didn't know that.
And that was a lot of money for a teenage girl in that time, you know. Because we didn't get an allowance, you know, as children.
Hmm.
And so that gave us some money to spend any way we wanted to, you know.
Did you have a favorite teacher, and why?
Oh, yes. My favorite teacher was in the 3rd grade. And I remember her name was Miss Mayo. And I liked her because every day after lunch, we put our head down and she told us a story, and she made up the story. It wasn't one that she read from the book. And all the children enjoyed this story about the little boy who was made of rubber. He bounced, and he couldn't sit near the radiator because he would melt. And one day the children on this playground was rough playing with him, and he bounced on top of the school building. And we just loved that story. At a time, well, she made up different stories, but all her stories were, she would make us put our head down on our desk, and she would close her eyes for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then she'd lift her head up, and she had created this story in her own head, you know, one that she had made up.
Now, describe your first job when you got out of school.
Well, my first job when I got out of high school, of course, Daddy Mac took us to school, to East Carolina, and but I worked at Rose's dime store, and first of all, I worked on the floor using a cash register that just, you know, the handle, you had to, and then later I did so well, they put me in the office. And of course they had the adding machine. I'd take the tapes from the cash register and figured out how much money was taken in during the day, the old machines with the adding machines and the thing. And that was my first job out of high school, you know.
Now, where did you meet Raymond?
Oh, we had a double date, and he was dating someone else, and I was dating someone else at the time that we dated. You dated on cars, and the girl, one of his best friends was dating me, and he was dating a girlfriend of mine, but I looked so cute. He fell in love with me that night, and we didn't have telephones, so he couldn't just pick up the phone and call me. But I had shoulder-length black hair and a little white band in my hair, and he just thought that was so cute. And so he arranged, we had a date within the next week, and he wrote me while I was there, and he wanted to get back together. And so at that time I thought, well, that must be it, you know. He made a real effort to, contact me, and so we did, but it was still 4 years before we got married, because I finished my schooling and he had 2 years in the military, and so then after he got out of the military we got married, and then he went to school and I taught school, you know.
Where do you remember when he proposed to you?
I don't know that he
Officially proposed?
really proposed. It was just assumed that we were going to be getting married, you know.
Where did you get married at?
I got married at Hollywood Presbyterian Church, and it was a nice wedding. I had the long white dress and the attendants, and then we had the reception after church, right at the church, yeah. And the party after the rehearsal party was at Aunt Mamie and Aunt Ruth's house. They were always very gracious and doing things like that, and everything worked out fine. Raised from a family similar to ours, and we had the same background, and so everything worked out great.
Who was his best man and who was your bridesmaids? Do you remember that?
His best man was his, I think it wasn't his brother, I don't think. I'm not really sure who his best man was, but I think Lucille and Lou were in my wedding, and I had a lot of my girlfriends were attendants, yeah.
Okay. And do you remember the day you found out you were a grandmother?
That I was a grandma?
Yeah, tell me about it. What were you thinking?
Oh, it was great, but the sad part was, that Laura's first child was born dead, and that was very sad when she called, and so we rushed up there. But then it was very exciting because we went up to see the new baby, and I stayed there for a week, and then Ray came back and got me again at the end of the week, so it was very exciting. Especially I was more excited for Laura and Jack than even for me, because this turned out to be a good, healthy situation.
And a blessing.
A child, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember was Mom Mac and Daddy Mac alive during then?
Were
Teddy
they
Mac
living
would-
at that
yeah.
time? Yes, they were living at that time. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember calling up and telling them?
Oh, yeah. I did.
What did Mama Mac say?
No, they were excited, but of course, they already had so many grandchildren already, I guess, that it was just another one. But well, yeah, they were happy,
Yeah.
for us and for Lori. Mm-hmm.
What kind of, as a grandparent, and Mom Mac and Daddy Mac were great grandparents, wonderful
Right.
people. What is one thing they bestowed upon you that you say, oh man, I'm glad, they're a good example for?
Well, their devotion to each other, I think, and to the children was certainly a good example for us that we all, tried to follow with our own children and with our spouses. And I think they always put the family and grandchildren first, and that was certainly a good example for us.
What was the most rewarding thing as a parent?
As a parent,
Yeah.
to see them grow up and to be responsible and to make a good life for themselves, that's very rewarding.
Okay. Now, I didn't know, Mom Mac and Daddy Mac, I talked to them a little bit, but I didn't hear a lot of stories about them growing up.
About
Okay.
them growing up,
Yeah, yeah. Can you share me a story of Mom Mac growing up and a story that Daddy Mac shared about a memory of him what he did as a kid?
Mm-hmm. With Mama Mac and Daddy Mac, with Mama Mac, I know her mother was a widow, and they had a small farm, and so her mother had the responsibility of really looking after the farm and the crops. And the older sister actually became like a mother. She did the cooking and the cleaning and making clothes for the kids. It was almost like her sisters and brothers were her children. But I think Aunt Mamie, the older one, became the mother, and the children helped in the fields and so on. With Daddy growing up, I really don't know too much except he was the baby in the family and a little spoiled. And from what I understand, he was. And he had a stepmother that he gave a lot of problems to. I guess he didn't Uh, she, I think he aggravated his stepmother quite a bit, and I think she left or something, is what I understand, you know, that he
What
was-
happened to his mom?
she died, but I really don't know exactly why. You know, I need to find that out because I'm sure some of the other children probably know what she died of. I'm really not sure though.
How old was he when she died?
I don't know. She had right many children because Daddy Mac had at least 3 brothers and 2 sisters. So it was about like a family of 6 or 7, you know. Because Daddy Mac had a brother, Uncle Gip, that lived in Wilmington, and a brother, Uncle Levy, that lived on the farm for a while, and then he sold his farm and moved to Washington, North Carolina. Then he had a sister that lived out of Washington, Old Ford. Then he had a sister that lived in Tarboro that we would visit her. And then I think I know he had a sister named Aunt Daisy. I'm not sure where Aunt Daisy was married or not, but they were about like a family of at least 6 or 7 of them, you know.
Do you remember the grandparents? Your grandparents?
I did not know that both grandparents were dead when I was born. I think Mavis was about the only one that knew Daddy Mac's father. Well, she was a child too, because Mama Mac was married a few years before she had her first child. In fact, her Daddy's father kept saying he didn't think he was going to get, Daddy Mac was going to have any children. They expected to get married and have children. Well, Mama Mac and Daddy Mac were married at least a couple of 2 or 3 years before Mavis was born.
Every year we come to the beach,
Uh,
and this is one of the Mom Macs and Daddy Mac's things they always wanted.
Right.
Do you remember them talking about the beach
Oh,
with
yeah.
you?
They enjoyed it. The most that Mama Mac enjoyed it was just seeing everybody together and having fun. And Daddy Mac felt the same way. But he also enjoyed getting out with the children, Matt and Charles and all of them, in clam digging or going boat riding or whatever. He enjoyed the activities. Mommy Mac was more stayed in. She wouldn't go out much on the beach, but she enjoyed being with the family and seeing everyone having a good time and getting along.
Now you grew up on the farm.
I grew up on the farm.
Yep.
Yes.
What was the first time you saw a beach? How old were you?
I don't remember the first time, but probably I must have been almost a teenager. Well, I did as a teenager go fishing. One of the ladies in the community enjoyed fishing, and she took us all out fishing on 4th of July one time, the teenagers. My age, Lucille and me and Anna Lou and Jean Mills, along with her grandson, which was about the same age. And I sat on the front of the boat all day without sunscreen, and I had many blisters on my thighs here. I could hardly walk across the floor the next week. They were big water blisters. And my daddy said, "I'm not sorry one bit. You ought to have more sense, and I should have." But I learned my lesson, about that. That wasn't much fun. So I did, as a teenager, occasionally do that. But and I don't remember going to the beach with Ray too much. But I did with my other boyfriend in high school. We'd go to the beach a lot.
What do you like most about the getting together at the beach?
At the beach,
Yeah, what do you like most?
now at the beach, just being with family,
Now,
seeing, everybody that I don't see about once a year or.
Now, what would you like to say to the younger siblings?
that family is important and to keep in contact.
What is your full name?
Lucille McGowan Dina.
Were you named after someone?
No,
Where did your name come from?
I think someone read it in a novel and they thought it was neat. I don't think it's French. That would be great if it was a French name.
All right.
Shoot.
Leave it to you to make it French. Okay. When and where were you born?
I was born in Peake County, July the 5th, 1928.
When and where were you baptized?
At the Hollywood Presbyterian Church. It was in a 2-room building. It was a church. I was a charter member, but the building itself was not built, but it was in a 2-room, you know. It was once a school building. It was once a school building.
What was your first memory of the house you were born? Think about, how about mornings?
How about what?
The morning.
That I was born?
No, in the house. Tell me what you did first thing in the morning. In the house growing up.
Well, if it were in the wintertime, I would run across, I was in a bedroom across from a hall. Our house had a long hall, divided the bedrooms, you know, 2 bedrooms on each side. And I would run across the hall where it was warm to buy a heater to get dressed so I could be, you know, could dress in a warm room. That was in the winter. And in the summer, I would get dressed in the room that I slept in.
That's good. That's fine. What's your earliest memory of Mama Mac?
I can't remember the first one. I just remember her having breakfast cooked for us when we got up and dressed. And we had the hall, then there was a little division between the hall and the kitchen and the dining room. And you would walk down, it was a step down. And I remember having breakfast, a delicious breakfast. Before we went to school, she would have breakfast on the table for us.
Okay.
I remember her always looking after her children.
And what is the first memory of Daddy Mac?
I remember Mama Mac first. I remember him being a strong disciplinarian. Well, I can remember going, this was before we were going to school. We would go, we would all get in the car and go to Sunday school, or maybe it was before then. We would walk to church. On Sunday afternoon, we had Sunday school in the afternoon, on Sunday afternoon. So after church, after our Sunday dinner, the boys in the neighborhood, there was a lot of boys in the neighborhood, and they would want to play baseball. And they would be out playing baseball, and my brothers would have to stop playing baseball and get in and get dressed and go to Sunday school. And we didn't have a car at that time, and we would walk to Sunday school. And there was a family near our home that always had lots of company. It was a nice house, and that front porch was just loaded with people. relatives, visiting. Of course, it wasn't air conditioned or anything, and people would always visit on Sunday afternoon. And so we would pass by, and I don't know if this is true or not, but we visualized them saying, there goes Lonnie McGowan, taking his children to Sunday school, and everybody else was sitting on the porch, But I always remember him looking after his children and going to church,
What do you, now we always remember Mom Mac and Daddy Mac, but we don't know any about their family. Do you know, did you meet any of the siblings on Mom Mac's side or Daddy Mac's side?
Yes, I meet all of Mama Mac's siblings. She had a older sister. I remember my grandmother, I remember my mother's mother. She was Nana. She was a McGowan. She was born a McGowan. And she married a Williams. And she had Aunt Mamie, Mama Mac, Uncle Bus, Aunt Pearlie, Uncle Zana. She had 5 children. Her husband died and left her with 5 children. And she had a little farm. She owned her land, my grandmother did. And I guess she just got overwhelmed with not having help and not a husband and 5 children. But she had a brother. His land joined my grandmother's land, and he was a McGowan, Lee McGowan. And anyway, my grandmother remarried. And she married a Evans. And she had 2 children by that marriage. Nana McGowan did. Williams, Nana McGowan Williams, had 2 children by Evans. I even forgot his name. But he was not a good husband. I don't know if he were abusive physically or not, but he was an alcoholic. And so she did not butter herself by marrying that man. And I just can't believe she was smart enough to divorce him. Anyway, they got a divorce. And so my grandmother really had 7 children, 5 by the Williams and 2 by the Evans man. Anything else you want to elaborate about the...
No, you're doing awesome. You're doing awesome. All right, tell me one memory of Nana Lou that just sort of describes her personality.
Oh, she was a people pleaser. She was, I remember when Nana Lou and Irene would take piano lessons with a Mrs. Tucker in Greenville, and Nana Lou sort of excelled. She wasn't a great pianist, nothing like that, but she did excel enough to play for Sunday school, And she was a people pleaser, really.
Now, what do you remember about Jesse? One memory of Jesse that just sort of describes his personality. And you would say, man, that is so Jesse.
I remember he and Matt had a room together and they slept together, because we had a small house, really. And that was our room. He was hard. I remember one particular thing about it. He didn't like to get wet in the mornings when we were putting in tobacco. We had to be out when it was daylight, at least by 6 o'clock. My father, we were early riser. We worked hard. But if we finished doing that barn of tobacco, we did one barn a day. I mean, at a time. And when we finished that, we were through for the rest of the day. And I remember having to get up so early, and the dew was on the plants, you know, the tobacco plants everywhere. And he did not like wet clothes, and he had to be in the fields, you know. He did not like wet clothes sticking to him, you know. And I don't think anybody does, but I could just see him standing there with those wet clothes. He just did not like those wet clothes standing to him, you know, sticking to him. And I don't think Matt, it even fazed him, you know, he went right on. But he just didn't like a lot of things, and he didn't like sand, you know, being in his clothes, or, you know, he just didn't like that. That's one thing I remember about him. Now this is a silly thing to say, Papa. But when we go in and had lunch, and we would eat our lunch, and Daddy would finish first. And you know, we had to be quiet and eat, just do our thing. And after he left the table, we were talking and smiling and giggling and just having fun. But maybe, I don't know, that was what you...
Now, what chore did you like doing as a child?
I didn't like doing any.
What was the one chore you hated then?
I hated working out in the fields, I think. And I hated the sticky tobacco. You know, it had a gum on it, a sticky tobacco. Well, I didn't particularly like that.
All right, and tell me where you went to school.
I went to the Hollywood school, and I was in the 1st and 2nd grade in one room, and the 3rd and 4th in another room.
Okay, then you went to college.
Oh yeah, I went to Peace College. It was a small girls' school in Raleigh. It was a Presbyterian school, and it had about 300 people. And the school had been in existence over 100 years. It's an old school. In fact, they used it during the Civil War as a hospital, I think, part of it. It's a well-known girls' school in Raleigh.
All right, where did you meet Daddy?
Well, I had a good friend that her mother had a florist in Greenville, and I spent the weekend with her. She still went to Chicago, even though her mother moved to town, and they had a business in Greenville. But she drove her car back and forth to Chicago when she was a senior. And so I spent a lot of time in Greenville with her. And so she had learned a lot about the boys in Greenville, but you know, it was all new to me. So she said, Lucille, this boy needs a date and this other boy needs a date. And it was sort of a blind date. And I met her through her.
Okay. Do you remember when he proposed to you?
Well, we hadn't been going together I hadn't been dating about 2 or 3 times before I think he was ready to get married. He had been to State College, North Carolina State, and I had gone to Peace, and we were both back in Greenville.
When did you know you were in love with him?
Oh my goodness. He was so thoughtful. I knew his family. His family was very sweet and very good to me. And I said, I don't think I can live without him.
Yeah. So where'd you get married at?
At the Hollywood Presbyterian Church. And we didn't have a minister at that time. And we had the minister from the First Presbyterian Church. His family was a member of the First Presbyterian Church. And then Matt was still in seminary, and so I couldn't have a brother to marry me. But he helped with the marriage. You know, he probably said a prayer. You know, he couldn't say, "You and I pronounced man and wife."
Right.
And I remember his prayer very much. In fact, I have it on a LP, the one of those vinyl disc, you know. And he had, when he said the prayer, in his prayer, he probably doesn't remember it, but I do, that I would be blessed with children, you know, many children. And I was blessed with many children.
All right, speaking of that, when did you find out you were going to be a parent for the first time? Do you remember that?
I don't. Well, I was married in May the 26th, 1951. And I realized I was pregnant in September of 1951. I was still in college. I did not have, I like 1 year in college finishing. And, but I still went to school, you know, until, so I found out in September.
Okay. And when did you find out? You remember when you first found out you were going to be a grandparent?
I hadn't even, oh, I don't know. I can't remember that, really and truly. But I do know Rachel was my first grandchild.
Do you remember the day Frankie was born?
Very much so. It was a warm, very warm day. That was leading up to it the day before. I was getting bigger and bigger. And no air conditioning, 65 years ago. And I was running, he was due in May the 28th. No, June the 28th, excuse me, June the 28th. And I kept saying, I've heard that you can take castor oil and it would make the apple fall. And so that night, it was so warm in my house, and we decided to go to the movie just to cool off, you know. It was cool enough, you know, air conditioning. So I went to the drugstore. It was near the bakery. You could walk to the drugstore from the bakery. And I went down there and had them to do a dose of castor oil and some orange juice. And we still went to the movie. And my gynecologist had told me, said, you can take orange juice, said, but it won't really induce labor or make it come unless it was ready. So I had taken my castor oil and orange juice and went to the movie. We came back home, and about 5:30 in the morning, a.m., I told my husband, I said, I feel a pain. I feel a pain. And so we went to the hospital, and Frank was born at 6:30 a.m. on July the 3rd.
Now, do you remember?
1952.
You remember telling Mom Mac and Daddy Mac they were grandparents?
Oh, I don't remember exactly, but they were pleased. They were pleased. They just, I think they didn't admit that they were disappointed that I hadn't finished college, you know, because I still like that 1 year. And my mother-in-law, I live right next door to my mother-in-law. But she was a good mother-in-law. I was very blessed with a good mother-in-law and father-in-law. My mother-in-law said, go back to school, get that degree. I will keep that baby for you to finish. I will have dinner ready for you. And said, you'll be through before he's even walking. But I was so elated with being pregnant and having children that I didn't think nobody else could look after my children but me. I didn't think anybody else had ever had any children. I was overjoyed, really. I felt good the whole time I was pregnant. I was, never nauseated. I just stayed hungry, felt good.
Now we've heard about you growing up. Do you remember stories about Mom Mac growing up? What it was like for her growing up?
I remember that Aunt Mamie, she's the oldest, Mama Mac was next, that they worked real hard in the fields and for grandmother to keep her property. Because grandmother, Nina McGowan Williams, had her own farm. She was a landowner, a small landowner. And they worked hard to keep it because she was a widow,
Yeah. How about Daddy Mac growing up? Did he share many stories?
Well, Daddy Mac had a stepmother. His real mother, his mother had died, and he was left. He was about 10 years old, and I've heard a story that Daddy Mac aggravated the stepmother. That was the word on the street.
That was the word on the street. Name a good friend you've known the longest, and how many years have you been friends?
Now, excuse me, I didn't understand.
Your oldest friend. Who's your oldest friend? You've known the longest.
That's living now?
Yeah.
I would think Naomi Edwards was one of my oldest friends. But I had these two friends that I knew from the 5th grade up, and I stayed friends with them till they passed away. And
Who was that?
Louise Venice Buck, and she was at least 70. And I stayed in touch with her. We visited, occasionally. She lived out of town for a while, out of state. She finally came back to North Carolina, and we kept in touch. We really did. Very
Very good.
much. She was a good friend. The difference between the man, he and his wife. And he said, Lucille, let me give you some good advice. Blood is thicker than water. In other words, he was telling me that his wife would look after her son, that was blood, before she would him. I think blood is thicker than water. Remember that blood is thicker than water. And I've always remember, had you heard that?
Yeah, you said that to me, and you actually said that exact same thing. And we're at the beach. Do you remember the first time you ever saw the beach?
You mean down here or just
Or
the
just in
beach?
general, the first time you saw a beach?
Well, I was a teenager, really, and we had a beach. It was really a beach, but it was a river, I guess. I don't know. It was down at Witches Beach. And it was, I guess it was 10, 15 miles from where we lived.
Mm-hmm.
And we would come down here as teenagers, to the beach. And we just thought we were doing big things. And they had a dance hall at this place. It was just a tall, one person owned everything, Witches Beach, Witches. And they would take pictures, and this cousin of mine, and Irene and Nina Lou and me, there were about 5 of us, and they would take pictures of regular girls, and they would put them up on the wall, and we'd go up. It's just about like Sanitary Fish Market, got pictures of them. And he would put them up there. I guess it was a drawing card to get you down there. But that was my, that was my first thing of a beach.
What do you like most about getting together at the beach?
What, down here? What do I like the best? I like seeing my immediate family. Some of them live in Georgia, and I don't see them. But one calls me just about every day. That's David. He just does call me every day. And then I have one that lives in Connecticut. You know, I wouldn't see them real often. And I have a child that's living in Asheboro, that's about 3 hours away. And I have one that lives near. And it's nice to have them all in the same house. But now my family's getting bigger with the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, husbands and wives, you know. So I just love every bit of it. And I love seeing all the nieces and nephews, you know. But as I get older and they change, I can't remember their names. One year they have braces. This pretty little girl, particular, I won't call her name, and wears glasses and braces. And the next year, she's without braces, she's without glasses, and she's gotten an inch taller, and she's so glamorous looking. And I said, that can't be the same girl. And so every year, it's a challenge to remember, you know, because they change, don't they?
What would you like to say to all the younger siblings?
Excuse me.
What would you like to say to all the younger siblings?
I've enjoyed watching you grow up, but please put a name tag on it. And tell me whose child you are, or whose grandchild you are.
What is your full name?
Charles Edwin McGowan.
Were you named after anybody?
No, but I was named by my Aunt Ruth. She was the one who picked the name, Charles Edwin McGowan. And she was my mother's half-sister.
Okay.
Ruth Evans was her name, and she loved all of my mother's children. And so when I came along, she suggested this name, and they took it.
When and where were you born?
I was born on September 17, 1936, in the old farmhouse off of Newbern Highway. Mavis has told me the story of how that happened on many occasions.
And when and where were you baptized?
I was baptized when I was 12 years old. And because when Mom and Dad got involved in the Presbyterian Church, I was already probably 6 years old. So none of us were baptized as infants. We were all baptized as believers. And so I was 12 years old. There was an evangelist who, and that was probably 1947 or 48.
Did you go through confirmation?
No, I didn't go through confirmation. There was an evangelist named Zachary Pehoff from Spartanburg, South Carolina, who came to Hollywood Church and preached a revival service, which was very common in those days, and gave an invitation, and I was prompted in my heart to walk down the aisle and give my heart to Jesus. And the following Sunday, I was baptized in Hollywood Church.
What's your first memory of the house?
Of the house?
You growing up in the farmhouse.
I remember the chimney, and that was a place. The house had two chimneys, one on the west side, one on the east side, and the one on the east side overlooked the family cemetery, and it was right up against the field. And so I would go there as a quiet place by the chimney. And then I remember a big oak tree in the backyard. It must have been at least 6 feet in diameter. And it was right adjacent to the farm path that came to our house. So you would come down the farm path and you would turn into the yard and there would be the tree on your right. And it was a very, very prominent thing because that provided lots of shade for an area where we cut wood for the wood stove, for the heater. It was the place where we would kill hogs in the fall of the year. And right next to that tree was the well, and with a curb and a bucket. And so that was a center of a lot of activity. And then if you were to get to the house, the first thing you would get to the house would be the kitchen, the door to the kitchen, which went up a series of steps, and then you open the door. There was no porch from the steps into the kitchen. And and out of that kitchen door, a lot of things happened. You would go out of that kitchen door to go to the smokehouse. The smokehouse was right there, and get meat. And you would go out that door to wash clothes, because you would wash clothes in a shed right off the smokehouse. And out that door you would go to build the fire for the wash pots, to wash clothes on Monday. And or you would go out that door to the chicken houses, because you go past the oak tree, across the lane, and into the chicken yard. And then if you didn't go across the road but went to the left instead, you went to the family garden. So that tree was kind of the center of daily life there in the McGowan family.
What was your first memory of Mama Mac?
My first memory of Mama Mac was her washing my ears. This is a strange thing, but we had so many children. Of course, I was a baby. We had so many children that in order to get everybody in the car, my daddy had a 1936 Chevrolet. It had 4 doors, and all the children except me would sit in the back seat, and the last one in on each side would bring a stool, and it would sit in the floorboard, and they would sit on the stool. So there would be 4 on the bench seat, and then 2 on the stool, and then I would sit in Mama's lap. And maybe sometime there was another child in the middle as well, but I would sit in Mama's lap. And on the way to church, this is really, I think, among my first memories. On the way to church, she would look in my ears and examine me. She had obviously delegated the responsibility of washing and dressing me to one of Mavis or some of the children. And she would examine my ears, and she would say, "You didn't clean this youngin's ears. Look how dirty this youngin's ears is." And so she would get Daddy Mac's pocket handkerchief, wrap it around the end of her finger, wet it with saliva, and clean out my ears. And I was probably 3 years old. And I would resist. I didn't like it at all. But between the house and Hollywood Church, she went over my ears. And sometimes it would be behind my ears, but it would be embarrassing to her if her baby boy had dirty ears.
What was your first memory of Daddy Mac?
My first memory of Daddy Mac was going with him in the fall of the year. One of our neighbors raised peanuts. We called him Dump Evans. I don't know how he got that nickname, but Dump Evans was how everybody referred to him. And his real name was Walter Evans. And Dump Evans farmed, his farm adjoined one of our big farm fields. And there was a ditch between them. And Dump Evans had harvested peanuts in the field that adjoined ours. And Daddy Mac said to me, "Charles, let's go get some peanuts." And he took a 5-gallon bucket. I guess it was 2.5-gallon bucket. The bucket that we used regularly at pump and at the well and everything. And he took me by my hand, and we walked down the farm path, down another farm path, and we jumped. He jumped, took me in his arms, and we jumped the ditch. And me in his arms, Bucket in the others, and he let me find stray peanuts in the field. And he was looking for stray peanuts too. Peanuts that the people who dug the peanuts had left, that had fallen off the vines and things of this sort. And so we came home with a bucket full of green peanuts. You know, green
Yeah.
in the sense they hadn't been dried.
Right.
And and I have vivid memories of that. And a close secondary memory of that is going with him to a wake. A neighbor had died. And they would sit up with the body all night long until the body was buried. And I remember him saying, Eva, I'm going to, and name the man's wake. I forgot his name, but he was probably a Worthington or Mills or somebody Paddock, somebody in the neighborhood. And he says, is it okay if I take Charles with me? And so I went with him to the wake. Vague memories. But the thing that stands out is Daddy took the initiative to ask me and want me to be with him. And I remember that.
Now, how about Nana Lou? Then share one story with Nana Lou that would describe her personality.
Well, you know, Nana Lou was next to me in terms of the order of the children. And she, so Nana Lou and I were very close. She was 3 years older than I, maybe 4 years older than I. As a matter of fact, Nana Lou and I slept in the same bed until she was probably approaching puberty. And it was a single bed. And in that one room, Nana Lou slept in, and I slept in a single bed. And Lucille and Irene slept in a double bed. And Matt and Buddy, if they were still around the house, slept in what we call the back shed room, the room that overlooked the cemetery. And my memories of her, it's kind of sad really, but my most vivid memory of her is visiting her at Duke Hospital when she was so very sick. I had just entered Davidson College. I was a freshman at Davidson. And I left Davidson and went to Duke University and visited with her. And a few days later, she died. But I recall how courageous she was. There was no fear. And I recall vividly my sadness as I thought about the fact that she probably wasn't going to survive. And a few days later, she did die. And of course, she just married. She had been married probably less than 6 months when she died. I think she was married in the early summer and died somewhere before Christmas. And but everybody who knew her loved her. She was a kind and sweet lady. She was also very domestic. She loved to cook. She majored in home economics in college, and had lots of friends, and was I thought of her and related to her as not just a sister, but a very close friend. And so, and that was a very, very, very sad moment. Of course, we'd already gone through the experience of grieving the death of Buddy. But this was the second And one memory I have is at her funeral. Mama Mac came up to me and she said, "Charles, I haven't seen you cry." And I said, "I have a hard time crying." And she says, "I think it would be good for you to cry because I know how much you love her." And this was during the period between her death and the funeral. But I thought it was very insightful for Mama Mac to take note of that and give me good counsel about how to grieve. And I think it's generally true of the McGowans that we internalize a lot. And we hold our emotions in. And I've always struggled with that. And, but I have lots of memories surrounding her. She wore glasses, of course, and her eyesight wasn't good.
Was she sick before she got married?
Yes, she actually, her doctor advised her not to get married until she was well. And because she had suffered with ulcerative colitis. And the doctor had every hope that through antibiotics and various treatments they could bring healing to it. But then what happened, the colitis got so bad, there was a rupture in her large intestine. As a result, inflammation quickly spread through the whole abdomen area. And so that's the way I recall it. But she and Roger Shura were so deeply in love, and Roger said to her, you know, I want to marry you now. And I'm quite willing and eager to express my love to you by supporting you through this. Neither one of them saw death as imminent. They just thought it would be an illness they'd have to work through. Well, you know, I have very interestingly, I have very vague memories of him. I was in the first grade when he was drafted. He was in the 11th grade, but in those days you graduated after 11 years. There wasn't 12 grades.
Right.
And so he was drafted in, I believe in January, but he was given a deferment until school was out. And so when school was out, he had to report to the reception center in Raleigh, and he took a bus from Greenville to Raleigh, and eventually went to basic training at Camp Rucker. My memories of him are that he was kind of a quiet, he was the polar opposite of Matt, who was very talkative and very gregarious and more of a leader. Jesse was a hard worker. He was, and he and Matt they grew up almost like twins, though they were probably 11 or 12, 13 months between them. Wasn't a lot between them. And they loved each other. My relationship with Buddy, and really all of my siblings, with the exception of Lou, was I was the baby. And everybody loved the baby. And everybody deferred to the baby. and I can tell by going back and reading postcards that Buddy sent me that he loved me very much. And a part of his homesickness was the fact that while he was in the Army, it was the fact that he wasn't home and he wasn't with me. And but the thing I remember most was the night before he left to go to Raleigh to be inducted into the Army. There was a party, and because he was dating a girl in our neighborhood who lived right at McGowan's Crossroads, like you go into Blackjack. You come to a crossroads there called McGowan's Crossroads. And, and a man who lived in the crossroads. There was a store in one intersection, and then there was a nice home for that neighborhood at least, named Griffin Rouse. He was the coroner for our county. If anybody died or there was an accident or something, the coroner was the first one to investigate and make a report. He was the county coroner. And his oldest daughter was Catherine Rouse, and Buddy and she, I think, were sweethearts. And she threw a party, a goodbye party for him. It was not just a graduate from high school party, it was going off to the Army party. And Daddy Mac took him. And I went, somehow or other, I went to the party. I didn't stay long, but I went to the party. And the thing I remember vividly was there was a big wash tub filled with Pepsi-Colas and ice. I've never seen so many Pepsi-Colas. And they were there for the taking. You know, you didn't have to pay a nickel for them, like you did at the store. Right. And not only that, there was popcorn, and there were peanuts, and there was cookies, and streamers from the ceiling. It was quite a to-do. And I remember going to that party and seeing all of that, and it made a vivid memory in my mind. And I remember him as a tall, thin fellow who would go to town and bring me stuff. He would bring me a bag of candy or something because he loved me. And he even in his postcards that he would write, he would say, I thought of you the other day as I was somewhere and doing certain things. I thought of you and I remember the good times I had with you. And then when I read a letter that he wrote to Mama Mac, and one letter said, I'm enclosing $5. No, he said, would you take $5 of the allotment that has been coming to you and buy Charles something for Christmas? And so he was thinking about me even when he was he was in a combat situation then, probably in Belgium. And but you know, interestingly, we never. It was only within the last. It was probably in the last 15 or 20 years, that I was sitting on the porch of Fairhaven Cottage here with Matt one day, and I said to Matt, what do you know about Buddy's military experience? And he said, well, I know that he was trained as a chemical mortarman, 4.2 mortar, and he was in the 88th Chemical Mortar Battalion. And he said, I've got a serial number and I'll send it to you. So he sent me all of that. And I got online, and in a matter of 10 minutes, I found a complete history of the 88th Chemical Mortar Battalion. Every day with the coordinates as to where the headquarters was. And I traced him. And it was a very moving experience. And that ultimately led to me actually going to Normandy and with Eli and Esau, I mean Isaac, not Esau, Isaac. and we visited Utah Beach. He landed on Utah Beach. And the Chemical Mortar Battalion that he was a part of, they were trained to fire white phosphorus mortar shells, which was the closest thing to chemical warfare that really took place regularly during the Second World War. And occasionally they would fire. And white phosphorus, when it would explode and land on your skin, it would actually burn into the skin, into the bone. I mean, it was a very painful thing. And it wasn't used much. But that's what he did. And we kind of traced He was at the famous town in France, Saint Elise, Marie Elise, where the church steeple was, and a paratrooper got hung on the steeple as he was firing. He was there, and we went through all those little villages, etc. And then we wound up in a little village where he was killed. And then ultimately we found one of the sergeants. He was in one of the companies, and the sergeant major of one of the companies in the battalion, when he got back home, wrote a book about the battle in which Buddy was killed. And Buddy is mentioned in that book. You probably read it. And I traced him down, and he was living in Cleveland, Tennessee. And so Matt and Louise and Alice and I went over to visit with him one day. He did not remember Buddy because they were in separate companies, but he mentioned Buddy in the book that he wrote. And the book was the book of the month in the military history book club, and evidently sold a good many copies. But I was able to find copies easily in the used book market, and I got enough for the family and then all the siblings. But I can hardly describe the emotional feeling that I had as I actually went to the very site where he was killed, because I found in that little village one person who was there that night, and he was a Belgian, a farmer. This is a little farming hamlet, nothing but houses there, and everybody had their farms, but they would live in this hamlet, dirt streets, etc. And so I went into the village with Eli and Isaac and Alice with this book, not knowing if I could find anybody who speak English, because in Belgium they either speak Flemish or French. And there were two men talking on this dirt street, and I got out of the car was still running, and I held up the book and I said, do you know about this? And they said, just a moment, there was a lady in the house upstairs who was visiting from somewhere, Paris, I think, and she spoke English, and so she grew up in that village, or married somebody who grew up in the village, and she was there visiting relatives, etc. And so she connected me with this man who still lived there. And he was in his 80s, was not well, and she said, he's still here and lives in the house. And so she said, hold on just a minute. She went upstairs and called him and came back down, and she said, he'd be happy to talk with you. Could you come tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? And so when I got there the next morning to his house, his son, who's an engineer, spoke perfect English, graduated from Georgia Tech, but he was an engineer in Brussels, was visiting with him. So his son came over with him in his Mercedes van. And through his son, the interpreter, he told me the story of what happened that night and how his own brother was killed that night as well. They were in the basement. American troops were living upstairs. That was the case where Buddy was living. So I said, I'd like to find the place where my brother was killed. And this town was called Zadzo. And they said, what do you know about it? About the circumstances of his death? I says, well, he was standing at the kitchen window, firing his carbine, and he was machine gunned and killed right there at the kitchen window. And later the Germans set fire to the house and it burned, and they said, oh, we know right where that house is. So he took us in the van, and we went to the ruins of that old house. Nothing had been built on it. The ruins were still there, grown up with bramble and bushes and briars and things of this sort. And the son who spoke English got out of the van, and I got out with him. And he said, you know, I used to play around this house as a boy. And I would find all kinds of military artifacts, the metal parts of old gun belts and things of this sort. And he said, and and he looked around and he said, there used to be a set of marble steps to the house. And he went over and he dug away moss, and he found those marble steps, which was the front steps to the house. And on those steps, Buddy was standing that night guard in probably 0 minus degrees temperature in about 8 feet of snow. He was standing guard from 1 in the morning until 3 in the morning on those steps. And his job was to alert the house if anything was amiss. And so he told me where the steps were, and so I knew from the book where Buddy was, and he was standing on those steps. And so when the Panzer Division broke through the forest, and this house was right next to the forest, he rushed into the house, woke everybody up, and rushed to the kitchen window and started firing. Germans eventually broke into the house, shot up through the floors. I talked to guys who were upstairs, and they explained to me how they came, that the house was on, they threw a fire grenade into the house, and the house was aflame. So they rushed down the stairs and jumped out windows to save themselves, and they saw Buddy's body on the floor in the kitchen. And it's interesting, later they discovered that the Germans took the town. By late afternoon, the American forces had been reinforced, and the town was retaken, and they began to process the dead, etc. And I think something like 75 or 80 in that battalion had been killed in that village. And the sergeant told me, he says, when I came back into the village, somebody said to me, "Are you still alive? I saw your name on the dead list." And he said, "Yes, I'm alive." He says, "Well, your name's on the dead list." And he says, "You know why my name was on the dead list?" I said, "Why?" He says, "Because I gave your brother my watch that night." He said, "I was the sergeant in charge of setting up there, and I asked him, do you have a watch?" He said, "No, I don't have a watch." And he said, "Well, here, take my watch. You're to show up at 1 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock you can come in." So he was wearing my watch, and on the back of my watch was my name. And so they identified your brother by looking at my watch. But that's how that happened.
Were you at home when Mom Mac and Daddy Mac found out?
Yes, I never will forget that day, because ordinarily we would have to walk about a quarter of a mile down the farm lane to get to the New Bern Highway to get the mail. We had a little mailbox there, along with the other neighbor who lived on the lane, 2 other neighbors who lived on the lane. And our box number was 320, Route 2, Box 320, Greenville, North Carolina. That was our address. And normally, as we sat around eating lunch, we would decide who was going to walk down the lane to get the mail. And we'd often fight for the opportunity, because mail was our link to the outside world, and that and the radio. And but on this particular day, the postman came down the lane and drove up under the oak tree and then right to the back door. And he came up to the door and knocked on the door, and he says, "I've got a telegram for you." And the telegram had come into town, and the post people delivered it. Postman delivered it. And it was a telegram from the War Department. "We regret to inform you that your son Jesse McGowan is missing in action." And about 2 weeks later, we got another telegram the same way. It was always, listen, if the postman came down the lane to the house, we knew that it was either bad news or that Sears Roebuck had sent the package that we had ordered. You know, it was either a delivery from Sears Roebuck or a package. One time, the postman came down, and his whole back seat was filled up with duffel bags, because Matt found out that the record, the congressional record, was available free, and and there were certain books from the Department of Education that was available for free, and he ordered all of them. and so they delivered, several duffel bags. I don't know if you mentioned that when you talked to him, but that was kind of a funny thing because there must have been 200 or 300 books. And the postman was a little put out that he had to bring all those books up.
So where did you go to school from beginning to end?
I went to school, my older siblings went to went to Hollywood Church, Hollywood School. It was in about 1936 or 7 or 8, in the late 1930s, that the county consolidated schools so that these little one and two room schoolhouses, the only thing that they did was to was to have classes for the youngest children. And so Matt and my younger siblings went to Hollywood school. I didn't go to Hollywood school because by the time I came along, they had built Chicago School was big enough. They had added to it, etc. So that it was K through 11, now K through 12. And so that's where I started. My first grade teacher was Miss Jefferson, and I got very confused because at Christmas time she got married and came back to school with a different name, and we had to learn to call her a different name. And but I have lots of memories about my school years.
Who was your favorite teacher?
My favorite teacher just died back in, I guess, in March or April. Catherine Edwards was her name. She was a high school teacher. She taught me English. But she did more than that. She inspired me. And she saw potential in me, took great interest in me. And when Mavis died, Lucille told me that she was in a nursing home there in Greenville, where she was. So I called her up and arranged to go see her the afternoon after Mavis's memorial service. And I hadn't seen her in a good many years. But I walked in to see her, and I said, and she was in a wheelchair, was quite ill. She was probably early 90s, I would say. And we were thrilled to see each other. And she was quite prepared for my visit because I'd given her a couple of hour notice. She said, well, don't come before 4. I guess she had things to do or something with this something's hair and things like this. But I came and we had a wonderful, at least an hour long visit. And I said, Catherine, I'm here for one purpose. I want to tell you that you were one of the most significant people in my life. You're not the only person, but among the top 10 or 15 people in my life who shaped me and inspired me and encouraged me, you're in that list. Because when I was in high school, I was the only one who went off to college. And when I was in high school, you saw in me the potential to be a leader. And you formed a debate club and twisted my arm and made me join it. And you taught me how to speak and how to debate and how to think logically, how to make an argument, how to win an argument. And while doing all of that, you were building within me self-confidence, self-esteem. And I told her that. I hadn't made up the speech, but I told her that.
Right.
And I said, teachers are among the least appreciated of all professions. But I want you to hear it from me. You made a significant difference in my life, and I thank you for it. She died about 3 weeks later. And I'm so thankful that I can tell her that. Her name was Catherine Edwards, and very, very, very important woman in my life.
Name me one more person who gave you a little piece of advice you still carry with you.
One more person? Well, I would have to say that Matt always was for me a role model, my brother Matt. And he had a very positive influence in my life. I looked up to him, always have, still do. Look up to him. And he modeled for me what God might do through a man who was fully committed to him. And whenever I found myself kind of at a crossroads or at a difficult point in life, I would find myself going to him, calling him, getting advice and counsel from him. And so he's had a big influence in my life, bigger than he really realizes. But I would quickly say, his shadow was a very difficult thing for me, because in my mind, he was a giant. And people would sometimes say to me, I guess you're going to be a preacher like your brother, you know? And so I felt like I had something to live up to. And one of the reasons I struggled so hard against being a preacher was the fact that I wanted to make sure that I was doing it not just to follow Matt's pattern, but doing it because God was calling me to do it. And so I resisted it for a long, long time, because I knew I could never achieve what he achieved and be as good as he is, and that I will always be struggling for that. So his shadow was a major shadow for me. And when I would share that with him later on in life, he would laugh and chuckle about that, and always so gracious about it. But it was a good thing, because I wanted to make sure that God was really calling me to the vocation that became my vocation, and that I was doing it completely free of any kind of outside influence other than God himself. And so I would have to say Matt, and then of course Mama Mag always believed in me. She believed in all of her children, and she was an inspiration to us all.
Okay. Then there's, people that come into our lives. So how did you meet Alice?
Well, that's an interesting story, because I had just graduated from high school in 1954, Chicago High School, and during that summer, an evangelist named Eddie Martin from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, came to town with his evangelistic team, and he set up a big evangelistic tent on the old Pitt County Fairgrounds, which later became the Pitt Memorial Hospital, there on the corner of 5th Street Extension, and I don't know what that other street is, but you know where it is.
Yes,
And he was sponsored by the Ministerial Association in Greenville. That was in the summer of '54. And it was widely advertised, and Hollywood Church was very much behind it. And so I started going to those meetings. The meetings would be held Tuesday through Saturday night. There would not be meetings on Sunday or Monday. And they asked for people who would be willing to sing in the choir, and so I joined the choir. So I sang bass in the choir. And Alice had been invited by her friend, and her friend Joanna, who was a classmate of hers at Greenville High School, and Alice was in the choir, and so we met in the choir. And at that meeting, Alice was converted. She grew up at First Presbyterian Church in Greenville, but she really didn't know what it meant to have a personal relationship with Christ. And that meeting, she clearly understood the gospel and responded to the gospel and got very involved. And so the evangelist kind of organized a follow-up for these new Christians who had come to Christ. And the guy who was responsible for following up the teenagers was a fellow named McGowan, who was a young pastor in town, and I think he was Methodist minister to students. They had a little apartment near the college. And he eventually started the Methodist church out near the old Wilkinson Funeral Home. What's the name of that church? I forgot the name of the church, but it's a Methodist church. He planted that church. Anyway, he followed it up, but he also had a television program called The Circuit Rider, and it was live. They didn't have tape in those days, and this was in the summer of summer and fall of '54. So after Eddie Martin left the city, he formed a little Circuit Rider choir, and Alice and I were in the Circuit Rider choir, and we would meet at the TV station on Sunday afternoon, rehearse for an hour, and then he would go on the air live at 2 o'clock, and we would sing on the Circuit Rider program. And but she was going steady with a football player in her high school, and so it was nothing more than an attraction. And to me, she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, and I said to myself, I'm going to try to figure out a way to get to know this girl better. That fall, when I came home for Christmas, Lucille said to me, I saw Alice. She lived right down the street she lived on 3rd Street, right down the street from Elizabeth. And said, I saw Alice the other day. She and her mother were walking down the street, and she wanted me to tell you that she and Larry Powell had broken up, and suggested that it would be okay for you to call her sometime. So she was kind of forward, kind of aggressive, and so I called her, and the rest is history.
When did you know you were in love with her?
Almost immediately. It didn't take long. I am naturally very, very shy, and so I had a hard time expressing my affection for her. She was always the aggressor. She'd reach out and take my hand, and I was too embarrassed to take her hand. She'd reach out and take my hand, and those kind of things. But we dated all the way through college, and a lot of our courtship was by mail. And those letters are still bundled up in the attic of our home. One of these days, the children are going to find them. And we're going to all blush about it.
Tell me about your first job.
Well, my very first job to earn money was with the North Carolina State Highway Department. I was in high school, and my next door neighbor, former next door neighbor, worked for the sign department of the State Highway Department in Greenville, and he would paint signs, crossroad signs, and then Johnny Edwards. Yeah. And he told me that they put together a summer crew to stripe the highways out of his department. And I said, I think I can do that. And he says, well, I'll put your name in, and I think they'll be glad to hire you. 80 cents an hour. You bring your own lunch. And his daddy also worked in the sign department, Johnny's daddy. So he was living out toward Hollywood Church, and he would come by and pick me up at the mailbox at the end of the lane at about 6:30 in the mornings. And we would listen to country music all the way into the State Highway Department, sign department office. And there we would begin our day strapping. We striped all the roads in that district. Swansboro, Sneed's Ferry, Harker's Island, Carteret County, and on and on and on. And we do it in hot weather, in rainy weather, and there was no cold weather. It's just hot weather. I was talking to Alice on the way to the beach this year. It's kind of, they would never allow me to work. I sat on the back tailgate of a pickup truck and dropped traffic cones to keep people off the wet paint. I dropped wax. And then when the paint dried, I'd sit on a little box on the running board on the driver's side, hold on to a stick that was stuck down into the hole on the bed of the truck. And as he drove along, I would swipe him up and throw him in the truck. And I had no safety gear on, no safety belt on, I had nothing. And I was making big money, 80 cents an hour. And I did that for 2 summers.
What'd you do with your first check?
Saved it. Always a big saver. I didn't go out and spend it. And, but I saved it. And actually my first summer home from college, I think I did that as well. And so it was a hot job. And I worked with an interesting crew, because that was a crew that actually drove a big old truck and had a paint spray in the back and all that kind of stuff. But it was good experience, very good experience. And I had to work for a living, I had to work for a living. And but I'm thankful that I had an opportunity to go to college, because it gave me a bigger view of life.
When did you know you wanted to be a minister?
I knew from a pretty early age that God was calling, a sense that God was calling me to be a preacher, but I was afraid that I was being overly influenced by my brother Matt. And so I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And, but as early as probably the 10th grade, I sensed that I was wrestling with whether or not I would be a radio broadcaster. University of North Carolina had a great school of radio and television broadcasting, and that was kind of an up-and-coming thing with television coming online. And so I had great visions of my being another Walter Cronkite or some great newscaster. But in the back of my mind, I've sensed God may be calling me to be a preacher. But I said, and maybe just Matt's influence on me. And or maybe driven by my desire to please Mama, or please Matt or somebody. And so I kept putting it off, putting it off, and putting it off. And so I kind of organized my life so that I could have some time. And so I signed up for ROTC and knew that I had an Army obligation and so forth and so on. And then after I got out of the Army, I went to work for the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington, D.C. And then I was in the Army Reserves, because I had a military obligation of a certain number of years, and if you weren't active duty, you had to do it in the reserves. And so I was in a reserve military intelligence detachment based out of Fort Myers, Virginia, right near the cemetery, Arlington Cemetery. And that unit got recalled in 1961 as a result of the Berlin crisis. And we were shipped off to Fort Hood, Texas to support a corps that was being formed, and ours was a corps level intelligence detachment to support the G2 and at the corps level. And it was during that year that God really wrestled me to the ground, like Jacob. And so when I finally got back to Washington, my job was waiting for me. When I first day there, the boss called me into his office and he says, we've got a new assignment for you. It represents a pay increase, and you're going to be supervising lots of people. And he gave me a stack of stuff to read through, but I was really wrestling with God all day. And when I got home that night, I said to Alice, she had supper already. We had a little apartment in Falls Church, Virginia. She had already gotten a job teaching school. And I said, the supper may get cold, but we've got to talk about something. And so I told her, I said, Alice, I've been wrestling for a long, long time with the whole idea of going off to seminary and becoming a pastor. And I'll never have to talk to you about it. She said, well, I knew it. She said, I was awake at night when you were awake. And so we talked for a long time, then we got on our knees by the only one, we didn't have many pieces of furniture, but we had a sleep sofa. So we got on our knees by the sleep sofa and we prayed. And that was in the fall of '62. And by the summer, I decided to go to seminary in Atlanta, Georgia, at Columbia Theological Seminary. Wrestled with the possibility of going to Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia, but it was really out of my territory, and I never saw myself as being a city boy, and my dream was to be pastor of a country church. And I figured it would be better to network in the South. I went to Columbia Seminary, and we pulled out of Washington, D.C. on the day that Martin Luther King made his famous speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I listened to that speech on my little Volkswagen radio. And everything we owned was stuffed either inside or up on top of that little Volkswagen. And we drove to Atlanta, Georgia, rented a furnished apartment, and she got a job teaching school, and I went to Columbia Seminary. And I need to quickly say that I've never second-guessed myself. I could never be more sure today, then or today, that God had called me to be a pastor. I've never looked back. I've never wondered whether or not I made the right decision. Never. I consider that to be a great blessing, a confirmation, really, of God's call on my life. And so I did this, and I was so motivated and so focused that my academic work at seminary far excelled my academic work at Davidson College. I graduated magna cum laude at Davidson College, even though I had to work my way through. I graduated magna cum laude from Columbia Seminary, not Davidson College. I graduated from Davidson with barely a B average. I graduated from Columbia with a solid, it's better than A average all the way through. And that was because I was focused and knew what I was headed. That makes a difference. Makes a big difference.
So what is the one thing you love about preaching?
I love to see the power of God give expression in a person's life. I say that preaching is a miracle because I can't save anybody. I can't even save a marriage, much less get somebody to heaven. But the gospel can. And so somebody wrote a book one time on preaching, properly titled. The title is 30 Minutes to Raise the Dead. And I never go into the pulpit without praying. Lord, take what I prepared and empower it by your Holy Spirit and do things I could never do. And it's thrilling to me to see God do amazing things in people's lives, not because of me, but because I have told them truth. And God energized that by the power of his Holy Spirit. Marriage is healed. You know, people's lives people set free from the bondage of alcohol. Not because I'm a psychologist or anything of this sort. It's because God honors the faithful proclamation of His Word. And apart from the activity of the Holy Spirit, it's nothing more than words. But the act of preaching, and whether you're preaching from a pulpit or preaching on a one-to-one counseling situation, the act of preaching is one of the greatest miracles that occurs. And so oftentimes, God blesses me with people who come up to me and said, "You don't remember me, but I remember the sermon you preached on such and such a Sunday that and my life was never the same after that." I don't remember it, you know. And people came to me and says, I was one of the thousands of kids who came to Fun in the Sun down on Jekyll Island, and it was at Jekyll Island that I met Jesus, and so now today I'm doing so and so and so and so. And I helped organize and led, I was the director of Fun in the Sun for a good many years, which is a youth conference. And so it's very satisfying to see God use a clay vessel, which is got lots of cracks in it, and He fills it with the truth of His Word, and it energizes it by the Holy Spirit and does amazing things. It's a humbling experience, and so that's and that's better pay. Being able to see that is better pay.
What's the hardest part?
The hardest part is seeing the sin in the human heart play out into destruction. People who walk away from the truth and will not allow the truth to penetrate their hearts. People who insist on making the decision even though they're told again and again and again it's a bad decision. That's hard. On a ministerial pastoral level, that's very, very hard. On a bigger level, it's very hard to see how quickly our sinful human nature plays out to disrupt unity and relationships within the body. And so often you see lots of turmoil in the local church. I said to a local congregation not long ago, there's nothing going on here that couldn't be fixed by repentance and forgiveness. If you would repent of your sins and forgive one another, God would do a miracle in this place. If you just humbled yourself and repent. And so it's discouraging. There's a lot of discouragement. And the expectation is that you can fix all the problems and that, you're the miracle worker. So you disappoint a lot of people. This goes with the territory.
All right.
That's why I say, if you're not called to do it, don't do it. And I've said that many, many times to young pastors. So there's nothing glamorous about it, really. You're in the trenches all the time. And you're on call 24/7.
Yeah, I've always called it a calling. It is a calling. When I see people. We're here at the beach. Get off on a lighter subject here. When was the first time you saw at the beach? How old were you?
I was probably 4 or 5 years old. Daddy Mac, his oldest brother, his name was Guilford, but we called him Uncle Gip. G-I-P, Gip. Gip McGowan. He lived in Wilmington. And Gip was a blue-collar worker. He worked in a shipyard during the war in Wilmington. And I can remember on occasion, the first time I ever saw the ocean. We went to see Uncle Gip in Wilmington. That was a long trip for us, from Greenville, from the farm, to Wilmington. And Uncle Gip and his sweet wife, after they fed us a good dinner that she had cooked, fried chicken and everything, put us in their car. I don't know how in the world they got us all in the car, but we must not have all been there. But anyway, I was in the car, and they took us to Wrightsville Beach, which is the closest beach to Wilmington. And I had never seen so much water in my life. And it looked angry. It was moving, big waves. It looked dangerous to me. But all this sand, like a big sandbox. But the thing I remember most is he took me up on the boardwalk and bought me a big long stick of something I had never seen or tasted before. Licorice candy. A stick of licorice candy. I didn't like it, but I didn't tell him. It didn't taste right to me.
All right. Now, back to Mom Mac and Daddy Mac. What do you think Mom Mac is thinking right now?
I think Mama Mac is thrilled with her family. I think she has been given by God a deep sense of satisfaction that the investment of long hours and hard work and much sacrifice has paid rich dividends. Not only in the lives of her children, but the lives of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I think I'd just like to imagine, I have no biblical proof that this would be the way it is, but I think that every time one of her descendants turns their heart to Christ, she rejoices. And the Apostle John wrote in his third letter, I think it's the third verse of his, there's only one chapter in that letter. John said, I have no greater joy than to see my children walking in the truth. And I think that's probably the case for Mama Mac and Daddy Mac. And those who didn't know them could hardly fully appreciate the uniqueness of who they were. Daddy Mac was a very impatient man. Mama Mac really was a leader in the family. She was the first one to become a Christian. She set the pace. She inspired the children. Daddy Mac worked hard. And he saw that there was food on the table and that the children learned how to work. Mama Mac brought visible, tangible expressions of love and support and encouragement into the family. Both of them were children of the Depression, a fruit of the Depression. The Depression happened right after they got married, not long after they got married. So their early life was marked with depression. And so much of, even though I was real young and saw very little of the Depression, I saw lots of evidence of the Depression. One of our major vehicles on the farm was a cart that we called a Hoover cart, because it was made from the wheels of a vehicle for which you could no longer find gasoline or afford gasoline for. So they jacked up vehicles, pulled out the rear end of it, and made a cart out of it, and a mule pulled it. And they called them Hoover carts. Because everybody blamed Herbert Hoover for the Depression. And I often reflect on the impact of the Depression on me. Daddy Mac at the barn Daddy Mac would save everything. He would, anything that was to be scrapped, he would make sure it was scavenged for old bolts and nails and things of the sort. And on a rainy day, he would give me the assignment of taking that old bucket of nails that he had pulled out of rotten boards and things that he was going to throw away. And my job was to straighten them with a hammer and put them in another bucket. We never threw anything away. And if it was rotten wood, we would take it up to the wash pot and we would use it to heat the water to wash clothes with. And we would always take the nails out and the bolts out. And we would had a bucket for bolts, had a bucket for screws, had a bucket for nails, had a bucket for, and we never threw anything away. And so as a result, I have a hard time throwing things away. And my attitude is, this is perfectly good stuff, and I'm not going to throw it away. I look at these home decorating shows and see them pull out perfectly good refrigerators because they had the wrong color, you know. And now the end thing is stainless steel, and so they throw out microwaves and stoves, and then they work perfectly, but they just throw them out, put them in the big dumpster, right? I say to people when I talk with them about their church, I said, your church needs remodeling. But let me just tell you, you're old enough to resist it. And they said, what do you mean? I says, well, it's kind of like your house. Your children go off to college, they come back home, and they're living with you. And they say, Dad, this old shag rug and this old Harvest Gold bathroom appliances, that's so out of date. Why don't you replace them? He'll say, listen, when they wear out, I'll replace them. That's what you say, right?
Right.
And if you don't like it, go get your own place. And I said, that's the way people our generation feel about the church. I like the church the way it is. Don't mess with my church. And I said, but let me just tell you, you'll never attract the young people that way. You've got to update your church. And I said, my attitude toward the house is, when it wears out, I'll replace it. And I'll replace it with something that's new and nice. Something that's in style. But I'm not going to throw away a refrigerator just because it's the wrong color, or get rid of a commode just because it's the wrong color. It works perfectly. I'll throw it away. So that's all depression thinking. You understand that? Mm-hmm. It's all depression thinking. And we grew up that way. And I've got a garage filled with stuff that I would give to anybody who came in who'd be willing to take it away and use it. But I'm not going to haul it to the dump. My children will haul it to the dump, but I won't haul it.
Speaking of that, okay, what would you, closing out of this, what do you want to pass on to the siblings here? Wisdom.
Well, you know, it's hard to summarize that in just a few words. The thing that I've always told my children, and I would tell all of the Lonnie and Ever descendants, I would say to them, among the most treasured possession that you have is your family. Relationships are much more important than money and things. Relationships. Friends, in the long run, will be more important to you than your job. And so the thing I've always tried to instill within my own children, and the advice I would give to our descendants is, build strong family relationships and make them be marked with love and loyalty. Support one another. Love one another. Be willing to make sacrifices for one another. That's what we experienced with our family. Our parents, Mom and Daddy Mac, weren't educated. Daddy Mac was almost illiterate. But they taught us to love our family and to be willing to make sacrifices and to live out what love really means. The two relationships two kinds of relationships. It's a vertical relationship and they're horizontal relationships. So don't neglect the vertical in your efforts to have good, strong horizontal relationships, because the most important relationship of all is the vertical relationship, the relationship with God. And make sure that that's a relationship marked with deep love, loyalty, and commitment. I would say to you or to anybody who asks me in the family, the most important relationship you can have is a personal, deep personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And because having a relationship with Jesus is to have a relationship with the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And it's important to know him. Jesus himself said, "Not everyone who calls me Lord, Lord shall enter the kingdom, but he that doeth the will of my Father." What he was calling us to there was a depth of commitment and love, so that we view the world through Christian eyes. And we have a Christian worldview, so that when all of the noise from the world comes into us and all of the political correctness inundates us, etc., we have a solid place to stand and a solid ability to sort out what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is good, what is bad, what is evil, what is godly, etc. And if you don't have that, you'll be blown by every wind that comes your way, and you'll be making choices based on where you can make the most money or how you can have the most power. The anchor is Jesus and the truth of his word. So that's the thing. I think that's as basic as I can get in terms of advice and counsel, not only to my children, but to all the descendants of Lonnie and Eva McGowan, and really anyone else I encounter.